Nice and warm.
Oh, it's lovely and warm. Thanks very much.
Sir, now you are getting the voice?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. You are hearing me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay.
It was a bit muffled for a while.
Yeah. So, good morning to everyone. I, Dr. Yogesh Mishra of GMR Institute of Technology, India, welcome all the participants in day 4 of International Faculty Development Program on Technologies for Teaching Learning Pedagogy. I am honored to welcome today's distinguished speaker, Professor John Drawn from Athabasca University, Canada. I feel happy to present the brief biodata of today's speaker to you all. Dr. John Drawn is full professor in the School of Computing and Information System at Athabasca University, Canada. Professor John is a member of the Technology Enhanced Knowledge Research Institute and former chair of the School of Computing and Information Systems, Athabasca University. He is also an honorary faculty fellow in the Center for Learning and Teaching, University of Brighton, UK. Professor John has received both national and local awards for his teaching. He is author of various award-winning research papers and is a regular keynote speaker at international conferences. Professor John's research in learning technologies is highly cross-disciplinary, including social, pedagogical, technological, systematic, and philosophical aspects of technology and learning design and management. He is the author of 2 books. First one is Control and Constraint in E-Learning, Choosing When to Choose. And second one is Teaching Crowds, Learning and Social Media. Professor John's career has been diverse, included work in education, information systems, technology management, programming, marketing, and several years as a professional singer. Now I invite Professor John to deliver his talk on learning technologies and online pedagogies. Sir, please, sir.
My turn now?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for that fine introduction, Professor. It's very nice to be talking to you, and these are quite strange circumstances in which I find myself. You'll notice that I'm not sitting in a conventional office. I'm actually sitting in my wife's car. We're on a campsite somewhere in the middle of British Columbia. I'm making a connection via a cellular network. I'm hoping that it will be okay, and I'm hoping that my voice will be clear, but hopefully somebody will tell me if there are any problems. I'm going to switch across.
It is clear, sir.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Mishra. That's good to know. In a moment, I'm going to switch across to some slides. But I guess I should just introduce myself a little bit further to say that, yes, I have been at Athabasca now for, 13 years. So I've been teaching and researching online for 13 years, and I really do walk the talk. I live in Vancouver, which is roughly 1,000 kilometers drive away from the central campus of Athabasca University. Although we don't have a campus with students. We are entirely online. Prior to that, I ran 2 online programs at the University of Brighton in the UK. Among other things, I suppose I should mention that I'll boast that I'm a National Teaching Fellow in the United Kingdom, which it really is just to tell you that I'm fairly well qualified, I guess, to talk a little bit about online learning, and I hope that what I have to say will be of some value to you. I'm going to switch across to the presentation, and if you could just see the arrangement that I've got here. I've got my computer here, I've got an iPad that's providing an internet connection, back up here from a telephone, I've got portable batteries running everything. It's going to be fun. So if I do cut out, I apologize in advance. Hopefully somebody will tell me if it's something which I can easily fix. So I'm just going to pick a window to display, and with a bit of luck, this should show up for you. I'm going to remember that decision and allow it. Okay, it won't let me remember the decision, so I'll just click allow. So can I get a quick confirmation that you can now see a slide saying learning technologies and online pedagogies?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are seeing this.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. It's the first time I've used this particular technology for this purpose, so I'm looking forward to this one. So I've given this one a subtitle of letting go but staying close. And I don't know how much you will remember of anything that I say today, but if you can remember that, then I think online teaching and online, or more accurately, helping online learners to learn. That's the essence of the whole thing, I think. It's the basis of now 2 books, and I'm currently writing a 3rd and a 4th, which pretty much say the same kinds of things. There's not much that you can generally say about online learning, but what I have to say, I think, is among those. So before I get going, I'd like you just to take a minute to reflect on what does it mean? What does it mean to be a good teacher? What does it mean to you? What does good teaching mean? What makes a good teacher? What kinds of things does a good teacher do that make them good? I'll just give you a couple of seconds to think about that one for a moment. Think about your own practice, thinking about teachers that you've had in the past, and at this point, I would normally actually ask you, and I would ask for responses, but we don't have an interactive medium here, and that's an interesting thing that's worth noting. So I'm doing what's guided didactic conversation. It's not real conversation, but I'm imagining what you're thinking now, and I'm imagining there's going to be quite a diverse range of things that you're thinking. I'm going to tell you about my proudest teaching moment, and maybe that will give you a hint about what I mean. I once had a student complain to me very angrily that I wasn't teaching him. And I was a little bit surprised, because as I said, I know a little bit about teaching. And I said, well, are you learning anything? And he said, oh, yes, tons. And actually, turned out, more than I've ever learned on any other course before. But I have to do it all myself. You're not teaching me anything. That was, I just broke out into a broad grin. You can imagine. And he sort of looked at me puzzled for a moment, and we both laughed. Because it was that wonderful moment, when a student realizes something. And you could just see the thing occurring to me. Okay, so learning isn't teaching. So I mean, that's, and I say that to give that a little bit of context, because a lot of what I'm going to be saying is that we are very used to being in control of classrooms, and we think that that's teaching. But what we're doing is enabling learning, and it doesn't matter how that happens. The trick is to find ways to make that happen. And that's really what a lot of the rest of this talk is going to be about. I'm not going to talk to you about whizzy technologies and wonderful things that you can do with adaptive hypermedia and immersive learning and all of those sorts of things, because really that doesn't matter. I realized as I was preparing these slides that about 90% of my teaching is via email. Sometimes a little indirectly. A lot of it is social media sites delivering email to people, or learning management systems delivering email. But from the student's perspective, a lot of their interaction with me, most of it probably, is with this lowest threshold technology there is, email. And it's not the technology as such that matters. And I'll get into that in a moment. First of all, I mean, I think now you've had some time to think about what being a good teacher means to you, and I think these are true whether you're online or not. And there is a logic to the color scheme that I'm using here, but I won't give it away yet. But suffice to say, though, that the two in the middle there, passion and compassion, I think are probably the two things that make the difference between an okay teacher and a great teacher. And I think the two things at the top, knowing about learning and knowing about learners, those are two fairly central things. Knowing how people learn and knowing how the learners that you're teaching are learning right now, what they're doing, how they're learning, what they're learning, when they're learning, who they're learning with. Those things kind of matter. There are other things that I guess are kind of important. The caring and sharing, definitely. Enthusing people, respecting your students, challenging your students, supporting them very definitely. And I think very importantly, I've stuck somewhere down in the bottom left-hand corner, reflecting, thinking about your own teaching, adapting and changing what you're doing as a result. And I've made a whole column to itself on motivating, because this is a really central thing. And I think, as I hope to be able to tell you a bit more about, I think it is the central difference between in-person learning and online learning is the different ways that motivation works in them. But in both, I think that what makes a good teacher effective at supporting motivation, not motivating students, it's actually supporting their motivation. It's about making what they're learning relevant to them, seeing how it's meaningful to them within their own context, within their own history, and with their own wishes and aspirations and dreams. It's about making learning active, so that it's not something that is just kind of being received. And I think that was the thing with my student that I spoke about at the start, that he thought that teaching was me telling him things, and that's so much not what it is. Making it engaging, making it personal, again, that's about the relevance and the meaning. It's about students doing things that matter to them. And making learning visible. It's about not just about, again, drilling knowledge into students, but allowing them to see what they're learning and how they're learning, and allowing you to see what they're learning and how they're learning. This is a slide with a lot of words on it. I'll boil it down to three bullet points. The first, caring about, knowing about the learners. The second, caring about and knowing something about learning and teaching, the discipline of learning and teaching, the scholarship of learning and teaching. And that, I say that, I mean, that makes it sound like it's an academic discipline. No, I mean, some of the greatest teachers I've ever known are not really great academics of learning. They're not great, they're not scholars of learning and teaching. They're just really good teachers who've really thought about it, reflected about it, and have been inspiring to their students and have been inspired by their students. And I think that, again, speaks to caring about the subject that you teach, because it's hard to be passionate about things unless you find them interesting. Not impossible, it can be done, but it works a lot better if you care about it. The thing is, what is teaching? I mean, one way of thinking about it is as a bunch of methods that we use to help people to learn. Pedagogical methods, or pedagogies for short. And many pedagogies that we use in person are kind of determined by the fact that we're in a classroom context. And if you think about it, it's a little bit weird, because here we are in a situation where we're forced to spend maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours. And I say forced because it's there in the timetable and it's there in our contracts, and somebody wants us to be there, and the students expect us to be there. In fact, the students have to be there. So so it's already this very artificial situation where you somehow got to do something called teaching for an hour. Let's say an hour. It could be any length of time you like. And And that creates a whole bunch of interesting problems in itself. It means that, I mean, by default, I mean, historically, it evolves from the lecture form. Lectures were a good idea, and a lecturer was somebody who read, because very few people read, and books were incredibly expensive. So that meant you had to stand up in front of the class. You had to have some kind of control over your students in the class, because otherwise, you couldn't have everybody talking at once. You couldn't have them talking to each other or to one another. You couldn't have, I mean, there's a lot of things you couldn't have, and there are lots of other things. You had to get them all in one place at one time, and that meant that you had to have some kind of schedule, a timetable. The light has gone off in my car. Let me see if I can switch that one back on again. No, it's not going to go back on. Well, we're just going to have to have it. We're just going to have this in the dark. I think I have a flashlight in my pocket. I will get this out and let's see how this goes. Wow, that was. I can't see a thing now. Okay. So historically, I mean, essentially, the ways in which we teach led us to teach in certain ways, and we had to get students in at certain times. We had terms. Terms came about because of at least the ones used across most of the world are the result of Christian holidays. Because the students weren't around at Christmas, they weren't around at Easter, and they were off doing the harvest in summer. So I mean, that's a really bizarre thing to base the length of a course on, for example. And I don't know about you, but I mean, certainly in my institution, and I believe in most institutions in the world, courses are a certain length. They're typically about 13 weeks long, maybe 15, sometimes 10, but basically, or maybe multiples of that. But basically, they have to fit in that space. And I don't know any subject. I don't think you can every subject can be taught in exactly the same amount of time. It doesn't really make any sense to me. So we've got a lot of the things that we've done have caused problems. And the big problems, and this comes down to motivation, the big problems that it creates, and I've got a picture of an elephant in the room. I don't know if that means the same thing in India, because you've got elephants all over the place, as I recall. I did visit 20 years ago. But the elephant in the room is the thing that nobody wants to mention. And the things that nobody wants to mention is that the in-person teaching results in people who would rather be somewhere else. That is to say that not every student wants to be there at your lecture at 9 o'clock on Monday morning, at least maybe not every time that you're giving it. It leads to people who are not in control. And we really do need to feel in control if we're going to feel motivated and happy. And it leads to some people are just going to be confused because it will be too difficult for them, and some people are going to be bored because they know it already. In fact, a surprising percentage across many institutions, something in the order of, I think, 30% of stuff that students are taught, they already know on the whole. I don't think that's a bad thing myself, but it's an interesting thing. And of course, some of our students we know already know most of what we're teaching them. So why are we trying to teach them? We're doing it because of the nature of in-person learning. You have everybody there at the same time. So actually what makes good pedagogical sense, what makes good teaching, is to find ways around these problems. Now, this Venn diagram that I'm showing you now comes from the self-determination theory. And self-determination theory is an incredibly well-validated motivational theory that covers quite a lot of it's a sort of meta theory of motivation. It covers quite a lot of issues. It's not about how you motivate people, it's about how people are motivated. And it's been validated over the last 30 or 40 years in various different ways by thousands of people. And one of the key things that it says is that for intrinsic motivation, that is to say that when we do things just because we want to do them, because we love doing them, three things are needed. The big one is autonomy. We need to feel in control. And as I just mentioned, this is not really a great thing in in-person learning. It's the natural way things go is that students are not in control. They're forced to be in one place, they're forced to listen to somebody, they're forced to do things that one person tells them to do. This is not good for autonomy. It's not great for competence, which is the need to be challenged and to overcome challenges, to feel that we're becoming more competent, more able to do things. It's a hugely important part of human existence, is just to get better at doing things. That's how we're born, you know, we're born kicking and screaming, wanting to learn stuff. And again, you know, because some people get bored and some people get confused, the natural direction in classroom motivation is really away from competence. What it does do terribly well is it gets lots of people together, and so it's fantastic for relatedness, which is the third pillar of intrinsic motivation. Now, what this means is that good pedagogies, good methods of teaching, need to overcome the kinds of problems with autonomy and competence support, which, as I say, by default, not very well supported. So, for example, for competence support, it's a good idea to do things that allow for students with different capabilities, or to allow students to help one another, to allow them to use different approaches, so that some can go more slowly, some can go faster, some can take a different route. A lot of it is about saying things clearly, and that counts as good pedagogy. That, in fact, if you look at a wide range of the things that are described as pedagogically good, you know, from problem-based learning, inquiry-based learning, active learning, then that's a lot of what they're focusing on. And similarly, for putting students in control, for autonomy, it's making things relevant, saying, you know, you might not find this is very interesting, but think about this thing in your life, or think about this thing that you want to do. So it's all about supporting goals and showing how the students themselves are having some control. And there are lots of really much smarter ways to do that as well. You can allow students to choose outcomes, for example, of their own, rather than forcing them to go with just yours. You can certainly allow them to choose different projects. Project-based learning is a very effective way. So they're doing things that matter to them. And that's classroom motivation. That's what that's about. Unfortunately, many of us, in fact, most of us, institutions force us into a position where we need to use punishments and rewards. Now, going back, so intrinsic motivation, competence, autonomy, and relatedness, this is when you're doing something for the love of it. You might not, some of it might be painful, you know, some of it might be hard and difficult, but, you know, we do it because we want to do it. Extrinsic motivation is when we do it for either to avoid a punishment or to receive some different kind of reward. We do it for a different reason. And of course, grades are a particularly notable form of reward, and for some students, punishment. And when we do that, the extrinsic motivation crowds out intrinsic motivation. It doesn't just add to it. It's not, you don't have intrinsic motivation and then you have extrinsic. When you create grades, when you create rewards and punishments, that becomes the purpose of doing whatever you're doing. There's a nice example given by Diane Ariely of how you would feel if, you know, you've gone across to your mother-in-law to have a nice dinner. She made you a nice dinner, it'd be lovely, and then you offered to pay for it. It would change the nature of the thing. When you and the trouble is, it almost always does stay that way. So when we become extrinsically motivated, intrinsic motivation that we used to have disappears. And this is a really, really bad thing, because I don't know about you, but, you know, I want my students to be lifelong learners, to love the stuff that they're learning, and to continue to learn about it for the rest of their lives. I think that what I'm teaching them is not the stuff that's going to be useful to them for the rest of their lives. It's the stuff that they're going to build upon, that will become useful each time they build. And you can really see it in very sharp relief. These two graphs show MOOC completion rates. Now, MOOCs, massive open online courses, I expect you've come across at some point, and most of us have by now. But basically, anyone can take them. They don't. There's no in their basic form, in their original form at least. There were no qualifications attached to them, no grades, no credentials, no certificates. You just took the course, and maybe you got a certificate of completion, and that was nice. So these are some of the numbers we're looking at the Coursera average. This is going back to 2012 now, but the things have changed for reasons that I'll get to. But 60,000 students taking it, of whom 197 submitted a final project. This is fairly typical. Katie Jordan has done a wonderful series of bits of research into it, showing that the average completion rate, median completion rate, is 6.5%. That's 6.5% of students start but don't finish, and most of them drop out somewhere along the line. We see, in many cases, less than half watched a single video. And so on. And when it gets down to taking final exams or doing things that prove that they've learned something, it really doesn't work. So without the power of grades, without the power of the reward, the interest in the style of teaching that we typically use tends to drop away rather radically. Now, what's interesting to me about all of this is that when we move online or at a distance, it doesn't really matter whether it's online, it's the motivational inverse. So online learners automatically have much more control. Right now, you can get up, you can make a coffee, you can stroke your cat, you can chat to your children, you can make notes, you can go and browse another website, you can talk to somebody else. All these things that would just be plain rude or impossible within a classroom, you can do. And in most cases, most online learning is done asynchronously. So it's not somebody like me talking to somebody like you. It's most of it is to do with exercises, discussions, various different forms of engagement that are done more or less at the student's own pace. We have at Athabasca, we have two forms of course. For most of our graduate programs are run as paced, which means that there is a week-by-week schedule, but not that everybody meets at the same time. So the teacher just isn't in control in the same way. The students can choose the time, the place, the pace that they're learning. And at Athabasca, we have another model of self-paced learning where the students have just got 6 months to complete, and they can do it at whatever speed they like, whenever they feel like it, and however they feel like it. And that leads on to the competence support, because unlike in the classroom, although I suppose you could put up your hand and say, please tell me what you mean, I didn't understand that. When you're online, you can go back, you can or even with a book, you can go back, you can reread the same page, you can skip to a different point. If it gets boring, you can move on to something which you don't know about. If you've got a video, you can rewind it, you can pause it, you can slow it down, you can speed it up. All of these things help to support the learner learning at their own pace, and therefore more likely to become competent. Where we do have a problem, of course, is with relatedness, with the connections with other people, with the social value of other people, is much less obvious online. And sometimes it's stronger. I certainly feel that I know my online students better than I knew most of my in-person students when I taught in person. But I know them differently, and there are different things. If you're working on something at home, and you've got to a problem, and you're trying to figure out what the solution is, and you send out an email to your tutor, you're not going to get an answer right away most of the time. It's wonderful when you do, but on the whole, there is going to be a gap in communication. It's going to be, and that that's going to make problems for relatedness. So, excuse me, I will get to that slide in a moment. So online learning by default, without more effort, does have difficulties helping students with relatedness. I should say that a lot of students, and this is a precursor to what I'm going to be saying soon, a lot of students find that relatedness in the people around them. So a lot of them will talk to friends, to colleagues, to family members. They'll find help around them. So remember that although we call it distance learning, or distance teaching, or online teaching, the learning isn't happening online. The learning is happening where the students are, in their homes, in their places. And this is really important. Their homes and their social networks, the people around them, their families, become part of, or can, when it works well, become part of how they learn, and can start to fill in that gap in relatedness. This is something from the last book that Terry Anderson and I produced. We were actually extending a model from Morten Poulsen, who had identified 6 different freedoms that online learners could have, and they're quite distinctive. In a typical classroom, you don't have much choice where. Well, you don't have any choice where, because you're in the classroom. You don't have much choice in what you learn, unless you've got a good teacher who gives you lots of options, or where you learn it from. The content is pretty much decided by the teacher. You certainly have very little control over how fast it happens. The method is decided by the teacher. Even the relationships with other people, with whom and how you relate to them, that's the classroom. You know, if it works for you, that's great. If it doesn't, choice over the tools, the kind of medium, you certainly don't have any choice over when you have to turn up at the class. And you don't have, and I think that I put in bold what I think is among the most important of freedoms, and it was the subtitle of my first book, was Choosing When to Choose. You don't have the freedom of delegation. Whilst you can't choose who is in control, it's the teacher in control, basically. And if the teacher gives you a bit of control, that's very nice. But you don't have the option of choosing for yourself who is in control. Online, it's entirely the opposite. Potentially, at least, these things can be very high. But remember our example of MOOCs. These MOOCs are taught in pretty traditional kinds of ways, with a talking head and a set of exercises and questions and answers, the kind of thing you often find in an in-person classroom. So a lot of online learning mimics what happens in person, and it doesn't really work very well. So all of these possible freedoms, people, especially when they're new to it, they try to claw them back. They try to claw back the control, because we've learned to teach in an in-person situation. We've learned to learn in person. It's very hard to let go of those habits, and most of us don't. And I don't. There are lots of occasions I don't. And I think, you know, I've been doing this a while. I ought to know. However, I mean, we do have these online freedoms, but that doesn't actually necessarily make it any easier. And this comes down to this thing about choosing when to choose, because this is from my next book, and these are catchphrases I've been using for several years now. Hard is easy. By hard, I mean inflexible, precise, sufficient, easy because you don't have to think about it, replicable ways of doing things. They're scalable, but they're inflexible. And the softer you make it, the more flexibility you have, the more difficult it is. When I say soft is hard, I mean soft. Greater flexibility requires more responsibility, more motivation, more intentional action, and creative thought. So although it's great to have all of those freedoms, we don't actually want them a lot of the time. Sometimes we want somebody to make those choices for us. And this is what, I mean, classrooms do this very well, because those choices are made by the teacher. But the there is a balance for everybody. There's what I call Baby Bear's bed, from Goldilocks and the Three Bears, the story where the Goldilocks walked into houses and into the bear's house, and she tried the porridge, and Papa Bear's was too hot and Mama Bear's was too cold, but Baby Bear's was just right. And she eventually wound up sleeping in their beds, and Papa Bear's was too hard and Mama Bear's was too soft, but Baby Bear's was just right. What we're looking for every student, and it's going to be different for every student, is that just right. And the flexibility of online learning makes it possible to do that. The difficulty is getting just right, because we don't want our students to be completely lost, and we don't want our students to just find it ridiculously easy. So, I mean, if something is hard, you can overcome the hardness. Lectures, as I'm sure you know, are terrible things. If you actually want students to remember what you were lecturing about. I mean, books, we know this since the early 20s. That there were studies done, but way back then, to show that reading a book is far, far more effective than a lecture if you actually want to remember something and learn something. And online tutorial videos, even much, much better still. And the things we do learn from lectures are the result of this in-person thing that you have to comply. And the reward and punishment aspect of it, the fact that we use these grades, I mean, that suggests that learning isn't a good thing. I mean, if you have to be given a reward for it, it means that they can't be very good. I mean, why would you give a reward for something that you just want to do anyway? And also this bizarre thing that learning is being taught. But the thing is, lectures do work. And they work for the reason that online learning works. Lectures work because timetables make students all arrive together. And when they arrive together, the fact that there are others around them doing the same things, that's very motivating. That's part of that relatedness aspect of things. They probably wind up talking to the people around them. I used to smoke, and we used to have to go outside the university to smoke. You know, we'd have to walk outside the door. And I would listen to the conversations that students had as they were coming out of their different lectures and their tutorials and workshops and seminars. And it was incredible. It was far more learning going on there than anything that was happening in the lectures. They were really challenging each other. And you know, this wasn't a high-flying university. This is a very standard, run-of-the-mill university. But they were excited. And that excitement was, they were learning with others. They were reflecting on what they'd done. They were talking with what they'd done with other people. So very, very important. Really, really important textbooks. You know, when you're not the only teacher in the classroom, and I'm going to come back to this one too. There's every classroom has, and especially if I personally actually I don't use textbooks, but I certainly make extensive use of open educational resources and publicly available websites and all sorts of other things that rely upon the fact that there are other teachers out there. It's not just me. And the lectures do work a little bit because of extrinsic motivation. Students want to get grades. You know, you create this condition. You're going to make them. We've made them want the grades. So of course and they know that if they don't attend the lectures, they won't get the grades. So yeah, sure, that works. And the fact that, I mean, but it doesn't matter. I mean, when I was a kid and I was taking my first big exams. It was a two-year course on math, and the math teacher became very, very sick about 1 year in. After just occasionally, we'd have occasionally somebody would come and sit with us, or a student teacher would sit and mark our work, but that was it. Basically, we didn't really have any teaching. And we did, it was by a significant number of times better than any other class had ever done before. Most of us got grade A's for this one, which was almost unheard of. And the reason was not that we were not taught, but that we had each other. We had a timetable that got us together in one place. We had the motivation to pass because we wanted to get these O levels. And we had a textbook. And all of these things were teaching us. So you don't even have to be there to teach to do well as a lecturer. I mean, lecturing it's not about what students remembering what you're talking about. It's about creating conditions where students will go off and learn stuff on their own with different teachers. Very occasionally, of course, you do get the odd charismatic and inspiring lecturer. I mean, that's nice, but it doesn't, very few of us can do that all the time. I mean, can you? I can't. So online motivation, you know, we have this thing about supporting the strengths and trying to make up for the weaknesses. That's the sound of my phone. Who knows what's going to happen? That's telling me actually that that I'm supposed to be here now. We had a time zone issue. Anyway, so the getting motivation working online is about making use of the strengths that are already there in support for competence and in support for autonomy, and in trying to strengthen the relatedness, the social aspect of it. I will focus particularly on the social aspect, the relatedness now, because the rest of it is pretty much common sense. It's letting, you know, for autonomy, it's giving students control, letting them use their own environments and defining their own goals. And, you know, for competence, it's about, again, giving them choices, letting them curating resources from different sources. I'll get to that at the end. But for the relatedness aspect, this is one that I would humbly suggest that should be focused on more than any other, because it's the one that's going to be the biggest problem. Really important as a teacher to give rapid responses the first time. I mean, if you respond to a student within 5 minutes the first time you do it, they'll forgive you everything after that. You know, do it right. Do it. So when I'm doing a PACE course, and the first week, I am working like a demon. I am answering emails at midnight and beyond. I'm watching out for those things coming in from my students. That are, you know, it's just so that I can do that rapid response once, maybe twice. You know, after that, I let go a little. And a lot of the reason I can let go is that a lot of it is about building communities, about giving students the chance to help one another. Giving is really important. That's something which we do almost naturally in a face-to-face environment. You're giving your time automatically. You can see, people can see you doing it. But giving time, giving attention, giving praise for work, not praise for the student, always praise for the work. Giving students responsibility, and wherever anything you can stick the word giving at the beginning is a good idea. Designing things so that students have to share with one another. All of my courses, the students, I don't force them. I don't say you're going to fail if you don't share, but I make it impossible to take the course unless they are sharing the work that they're doing. Mostly I make use of blogs, weblogs, you know, where they keep a learning diary, and they can all see one another's. And so there's that social element. They're aware of other people learning, rather like when they're in the lecture theatre together. They're aware of other students learning. Designing things that make monitoring easier. Again, those reflective learning diaries. So they're writing a blog about what they've learned, how they've learned, why it matters to them. And in doing that, they're telling me a huge amount, as well as their colleagues, about themselves, about how they're dealing with the thing, about how they're finding it. And that's really important. You don't see your students so much when you're online. So finding ways to build into the design process ways. So, you know, it's not, traditionally we've just used assignments. You just have a lot of assignments. At Athabasca, most students wind up doing 4 or 5 assignments and then an exam. That's better than nothing. But that's more of a kind of punishment thing. That's a kind of, you know, you've got to do this and we will give you a grade, sort of a thing. Rather than you know, if you're just doing this because it's part of the course, you're going to need it. You know, and by the way, I can find out how you're learning, and that's good news. Anything you can find out that students can share. I do things like social bookmarking, where they collect bookmarks and find stuff and share it with one another. Again, they're giving things by doing that. They're giving to other students, and it's good for them and it's good for the other students. Working on trust, establishing that you have some kind of authority, that they can trust you, that you're going to support them. That's really important, that you're going to, you know enough about what you're talking about to be able to help them to learn, that sort of problem. Personal profiles, using social media again as a powerful way of showing yourself, as well as allowing students to show themselves. And having an active online presence is very important, whether you're somebody who does it in public or you're just using a learning management system or email or whatever. Just make yourself visible and proactively engage. That's probably, this is the basis of doing online learning. It's different from in-person learning because you're focusing on different aspects of motivation. But it's still kind of things that all good teachers do anyway. I expect you're thinking to yourself, hey, I do that. Because you're a human being and you're a good teacher. So I think the central thing about letting go is to give students choice. I mean, once we build that social community and we've proven that we really care for them and shown them that we care, then the big thing is control, and this matters no matter what we're doing. So the first, of course, to have control, students have to have choices. They have to be able to make them, but that's useless on its own. Too many choices is just as bad as too few. They need to be empowered to make the choices. They need to know why they're making the choices. They need to have a reasonable idea about the consequences of the choices that they're going to make. So if you don't give them that power, then there's no point in giving them the choice. And really importantly, and this comes back to that issue of delegation of control, the freedom to choose not to choose. The freedom to be able to say, so they can work through doing whatever they want to do to learn whatever it is that they have to learn. But at some point, they're going to hit something which they won't be able to do. And at that point, that's when, if I'm learning something new, I just want somebody to show me, to tell me, to explain to me, to help me, to correct me. All of those sorts of things. They need to be able to choose that possibility. But it shouldn't be something we force upon them, because if we force it upon them, then they're not in control. If they choose to come to us and say help, or if we spot that they need help, if we see that they need help, then that's the point at which they can give control to us. Important design patterns for giving control: chunking things, small pieces of things. I make a lot of use of open educational resources. For example, I don't write much of my own stuff now. I find things, I curate things that I think students will find useful, and I try to empower them by giving them, I tell them why I think this particular open educational resource is useful, and why I think this one is useful. For example, one might be very detailed from the bottom up, and one might give you a really good top-down view. So these are different ways of learning. And so by giving them small chunks, they can choose those chunks as they go along. Building community, really important, central to all of this. Avoiding things like assignments. In the classroom, you're used to being in control. And giving assignments as a way of sort of monitoring that you're having an effect, that you're doing the right things, that the students are complying. The big trick, I think, with online is and also in person, it works pretty well in most ways. Much better to have some idea about what it is that the students want to learn, need to learn, that you want them to learn, whatever it is, and then let them find ways of showing that they've done it. Not about doing your assignments, not about doing the exams. It's about the same sorts of things that if you were applying for a job and someone said, well, how can you show that you're going to be good for this job? Exactly the same kind of things for the students. It's about monitoring what they're doing closely and proactively supporting them when things are not going well. I'm going to skip through the next few slides because I'm running out of time and running out of battery. The really important thing I had when I in about the year 2000, I was charged with getting. I think we had 4 colleges at that point and 2 universities together to deliver a program, E-Systems Design and Development, it was called. We had 6 months to do it. We had a lot of money. We had a reasonable amount of money. We had 6 months to do it. I had 30 teachers, 30 professors who had never taught online before, and I realized that we couldn't write 30 courses, which we had to do in 6 months, and have them very highly structured and very well, carefully designed, and all of those sorts of things. So what we did instead was, instead of coming into the online environment and seeing these are the learning objectives, here is week 1, here is week 2, etc. The first thing the students saw was the discussion forum. It was dialogue. So right from the start, when you have dialogue, you can respond, and you can be very adaptive and very flexible. The downside is that it takes a really large amount of time and effort while you are teaching. If you're making a lot of use of dialogue, it's going to be hard work. If you make a very structured thing, it's going to take you much longer to build in the first place to make it any good, and you're going to need a team to do it, because that's how it works. And it's going to be inflexible for individual learners, but it's going to be a lot easier, and once you've got it running for you, not necessarily for the student. Really important, use the distributed teacher. As I said, it's not just textbooks, it's everything around us is teaching us, always, all the time. Every news article we're reading is teaching us something. Every time we do a Google search, it's searching for something to learn, typically, something we need to know, want to know. And students are going to be doing this even in person, notably in person, but they're going to be doing it so much more online. And it's really important to know what they're doing, how they're doing it, to be able to recommend things that they should do, to find out more, to help themselves more, whether it's to support the relatedness, whereas it's to help with their competence needs. Maybe the textbook you've given them doesn't really help them. They need to find something else. All of that sort of thing. It's really important to know what they're doing and to observe it. But also important to give them the freedom to do it, because they're going to take it anyway. Find out what that distributed teacher is teaching your students. So Baby Bear's Bed, small hard pieces, let the students find those pieces. I used as a design pattern right from when I started. I know that the students are going to find things better than I can find for them, because I don't know enough about them, especially at the start, to be able to say, well, this is going to help you. But they do, because they're there together in the same place. So let them share it with one another. For this, anything you like, from Twitter to email to your learning management system, just give them a means to share stuff and build it into the design to share it. And definitely open educational resources. Very few, we are all a bit proud. And I certainly, I don't mind using a few pictures or the odd diagram from somebody else, but when it comes to the words, I want to write them myself, because I've never come across a textbook in my life, for example, open or otherwise, that is correct. There's always errors. There's always things that are just not the way I want to teach them, or I think, are you mostly engineer folk? I don't know. I'm a computing geek person. I teach computing stuff, and there's never the right thing. There's always slightly the wrong vocabulary, or slightly the wrong way of seeing it. Open educational resources, you can change that. You can find something that almost works and fix it. Much easier than writing it yourself, and much more effective, because you're building upon a design that already works. Bricolage, it's tinkering. I'm gonna skip the next couple of slides. This is really, I was hoping to kind of encourage you to reflect upon what kind of teaching you want to do. I guess most of us who've done the in-person either have a sort of design and build approach and or a performance approach to it. Some of us feel as sort of like we're gardeners, nourishing our students and helping them grow and weeding out the bad ideas. Some I kind of like, I mean, these ones in the middle, I kind of like the architecting ones, designing the space and creating the conditions from which they learn, but not actually forcing them down a path, not designing every step of the route, stewarding, building that community. But I think as we head towards the bottom, we're heading into the land that is both scalable and effective as a way of teaching. And one way of thinking about it is in terms of content. We tinker with the content. We curate stuff. We find things, we share them, we assemble them, we adapt them. We present them differently for our students. And ideally, we present more than one version of the same kind of thing because our students are different. We escort them on their travels. We don't guide them. We certainly don't direct them. But we share their journey and we share their discoveries, and we react to those discoveries. And we build networks. We create things ourselves. We model the role of somebody who knows about this stuff. It's very flexible. It can be very daunting, but it is, as a general pattern, it seems to be where we're going. And I'm certainly not going to go through all of this, don't worry. I will put the slides will be available online. You can look at this in detail and you can read the paper. And actually, I think we've written 3 or 4 papers about the 3 generations of distance education pedagogy, Terry and I. But we've seen a move from the beginning of online and distance learning from an objectivist approach, where teaching was all about presenting the content in a form that was easily digestible. That was basically the idea. And the idea was that we had some knowledge, the students didn't, we were giving it to. You know, you need that from time to time. That works. You know, if I'm learning a new language, say, then, you know, I need somebody to teach me the vocabulary, to tell me what the right things are and all of that sort of stuff. But it came from the fact that the technologies at the time really weren't capable of doing more than one-to-many. It was mostly sending out study packs or doing things on television or that sort of stuff. It was pretty much the only way we could do it. Around about the 80s and early 90s, the social constructivist movement became much stronger, and we started to see the use of particularly the web and online forums to replicate some different ways of teaching. That we would do in classrooms, where in like small group tutorials and the seminars and this sort of thing. So they were very much about building community and about guiding students, but not forcing them down a particular route, recognizing that every student was going to learn something a little bit different, but that with some kind of shared outcomes and shared community could help them. And now, I mean, from the early 2000s onwards and really accelerating since, we're moving on to a more complexivist approach. Terry and I originally called this a connectivist approach, because that is the theory that applies to this, but there are others that are just as good. Where we are much more recognizing that learning is a complex thing, that we're not the only ones in control of it, that students are essentially taking paths through their lives with other students, with other people around them. And we're trying to find, we're in a world of plenty, you know, where there's if I want the answer to a question about the computer networks, even when I was doing my PhD 20-something years ago, I mean, I could find hundreds of tutorials on Ethernet, say. Now I can find hundreds of thousands. And the problem is making sense of that, of wayfinding, of charting a course through that. And knowledge is much more about finding than it is about being able to simply repeat stuff. We actually need to make use of this stuff. So does technology matter in all of this sort of thing? Yes, it totally does. But pedagogies, methods, are technologies too. And it's really important to remember that when doing all of this, don't worry about what technology you're using. Worry about how the technologies you're using fit together. And remember that you really don't control the whole assembly, because students have their own pedagogies too. You know, when we teach them something, they use that and they teach themselves something, and they use sometimes the same methods we do, sometimes different ones, and they're learning from different people all the time. So and online, we really can't see that happening. But again, you know, you're in the classroom, you're controlling everything, you can see what students are learning, how they're learning it, and so on. You just don't have that online. But really, this has been my motto for quite a long time. It ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. I used to play guitar for a living, and it was quite frustrating to me that some people who could only play 3 chords were much more successful than me. And they were more successful because they were doing bad techniques using very simple tools, but they were doing them better. And this is always going to be the case, whether we're online or in person. It's about the assembly, it's about the orchestration, it's about how we put things together, and it's about how we respond to what the students are doing, how they're learning. Again, it's about seeing what students are learning, understanding what they're learning, and building systems that can support that. And remember that learning isn't entailed by teaching methods. This is my student's mistake. When I spoke of my favorite teaching moment at the beginning, his mistake was that he thought that teaching was something that just led to learning. It doesn't. At best, we enable it. These slides will be online. I'm not going to go into the details on this one. These are general things about the general principle. You're not in control, so you must let go. But if you're going to let go, you need to stay close to your students. You need to know what they're doing, how they're doing. You need to be there to support them when they need support. You need to be there to at least help them find a direction. But let them find that direction and help them with finding it. This is we're at the hour now. So this is just I'll do as briefly as possible. This is a pattern that I use in most of my courses now. There are variations on the theme. In all of them, I don't have assignments and I don't have final exams. I have portfolios of evidence that the students develop as they're going through a course. There's always a particular, at the beginning, they choose a scenario or a problem or a project that's relevant to them. Often, I mean, most of my students are working anyway, so they find things in the workplace, but I have visiting students from other universities. You know, they have hobbies, they have interests, whatever. I mean, they choose something that's relevant to them. And then we have a set of broad outcomes that I'm hoping they're going to achieve. And from then on, it's essentially about following a fairly structured process in order to achieve those outcomes within the context that the students have chosen. So throughout the whole process, one of the requirements is that I do force them to do something, is that they write reflective learning diaries and basically shared blogs. And I use a blogging platform that I helped develop myself called Athabasca Landing. Throughout that, they get a formative feedback from tutors, sometimes from me, sometimes we have a team doing it. On both those blogs and on the shared artifacts that they create. And my students are mostly, they're programmers, or they're creating databases, or they're designing websites or whatever. You know, it's practical stuff on the whole. All the way through, they interact with one another and share things they found, the bookmarks and stuff, and help one another. They don't have to. I don't force them. But they can use that in their portfolios of evidence as part of the evidence that they are competent in what they're doing. When they feel ready to submit the final thing, and at any point, it's always formative feedback. At any point, what I hope is that when I correct them, that they make changes. So as they go through, whatever they're creating gets better. But when they're ready to submit, when we head into the territory that none of us can avoid, where they have to get grades, I ask them to look at the outcomes, some of which on some of the courses, and more of my courses now, the students choose outcomes. So they can either decide to give a little more weighting to existing outcomes that I've come up with, or they can add other ones of their own, as long as they're broadly within the goals that I set for the course. That's absolutely fine. There is between 10 and 15% of the marks are things they've chosen. So they then map what they've done in their diaries and the artifacts they've created to the outcomes that we've agreed upon, and I give them grades for the outcomes. Each outcome gets a grade. That's how it's marked at the end. I think it's quite ingenious because it proves that the students have met the outcomes. Duh, of course. And it gives them any number of different flexible ways of going through it. In the process, these students, some of them are just following the basic defaults that I give them. Most of them are finding things of their own, sharing them with one another, and often coming up with better ways of doing things than I came up with in the first place. A lot of it is about making it visible, helping students to talk with one another, and trying to think about not teaching, but what they're learning. And that, a little bit, 5 minutes over. That is that. The too long didn't read version. Let go but stay close. You can't have the same control, so don't try. Relatedness matters, the community, the sharing, the social stuff. Technologies matter, but they don't matter as much as how you put the technologies together. It ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. And you're not the only teacher out there. They're going to find other teachers. You're not in control. Build things out of small pieces. Let the students choose them. Let them create them. And focus on motivation, because that really is the central difference between online and in person. What did you learn? Why does it matter? What will you do differently now? This is the what, so what, now what reflective framework. I love this one. I ask, this is when my students don't know how to reflect in their learning diaries, I say that. What did you learn? Why does it matter? And what will you do differently next time? That's it. This is all from me. Figure out how to turn back to the original, which I will get to shortly. Here we go. I think I'm here. Let me stop presenting.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir.
Okay, hello. I'm losing you. I can't quite hear.
Hello.
Hello. I can't hear. Sorry, it's coming through very fuzzy. I did hear a word or two. I heard something there. Okay, how are we doing?
Hello.
Hello.
Mr. Sir, please check your audio. No, sir. Yeah, I am Dr. Ravi Nageshwar Rao, Professor and HOD Department of EC, sir. Thanks for your wonderful session, and really we have learned many things out of your lecture. And also I'm very much thankful to you for accepting the invitation and delivering a talk and this during this period. Really, I think you are in traveling, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in the here I am in the car.
Yeah, even during the travel plan also, you could able to accommodate some time to deliver a lecture, sir. Really, we are very much thankful to you on behalf of GMR Institute of Technology. I would like to express my sincere thanks to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Sir,
thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, now you are audible. Now you are audible.
Okay, sir. if you have time, 1 or 2 questions participants are asking, can I take?
Yes, yes, absolutely. But about another 10 minutes, is that okay?
Yes, yes. So 5 minutes only, sir. So one question is how to deal weak students?
How to deal with the students?
How to deal weak students?
Deal weak
Sorry,
student.
with which
Weak
student?
student. Slow learner.
Weak student.
Slow learning.
I don't think there is. Some students learn things slower than others. Some students know different things than others, and some students are, of course, smarter than others. I mean, that's perfectly reasonable. I had a friend, actually from India, as it happens, who inspired me quite a lot. He was a professor at the university I was at, and he said to me, why do you ever fail students? I said, well, they're weaker. They don't pass. That's it seemed obvious to me. He said, no, I mean, you just haven't given them long enough. And one of the things that you can do when you're online, because you don't all have to be in the same classroom at the same time and following the same schedule, you can give them a longer schedule. So if they're weak students, you can give them longer. I mean, there are always going to be those that that are so frustrating. You try to help them and they won't. They can't be helped. That's going to happen, but not often. I've very seldom found a student who wants to succeed, who hasn't eventually succeeded, given enough time. But that is the trick. This is, and again, the online thing. Don't think about terms anymore. Don't think about the schedules and being in classrooms, because you don't need them. That was a problem with physics. That was a problem we had in person with physics. We don't have that problem online. I mean, we do have other problems. There are bureaucracies, there are schedules that we have to keep. There's only a certain amount of money that students can afford and time that students can afford. But if they really do want to do it, then they will do it. If they don't, if they're not motivated, then I would look very closely at why they're not motivated. Is it actually that there's no reason whatsoever that they should have any interest, and they probably shouldn't be doing the course? Or, and more likely, are they doing it because they're being forced to do it? And again, I would question, why are we forcing them to do it? It's a trickier problem because obviously we're all within universities and we all have constraints. And often those constraints mean that we can't make the big changes that would be ideal. But really, I think if the student is doing something that they don't want to do, that's something wrong with our system, or something very wrong with the student's intent. If they really don't want to be doing it, a lot of the thing we can do, and another nice thing about self-determination theory is that there are better forms of extrinsic motivation. The stuff to avoid is the stuff where we force them to do it, where we give them punishments or rewards. But when we do things ourselves for other reasons. I mean, if, for example, whenever I'm learning a new programming language, say, there are always things that I just find incredibly boring. But I do them because I know what I want to achieve. And if you can help students to find that within them, say, okay, you're going to find this bad, but how does this relate to what you want to achieve? That's the sort of thing that can help. So I don't know. There are so many different kinds of weak student. I don't know if there is a weak. But a lot of it. If it's motivation, then as a teacher, you help them to find their own motivation. If it's just that they're not very smart, or they don't know enough already, or they come in from a different angle, or whatever it is, then if possible, give them time. And give them different routes through, give them easier, not easier, yes, easier but slower, so smaller pieces at a time, that kind of thing. As in person, really, it's just that you have more flexibility when you're online, and it's harder to see when your students aren't motivated. You need to build processes that make it obvious what they're doing. You need to build communication both ways. Okay. Another question?
Yeah.
Or is that, do you want to follow up?
Okay. I would like to share the background of fixing this talk. When I approached Professor John for this talk, somewhere around July 20th, he immediately agreed. After 6 or 8 days, Professor John informed me that he will be away from town on the day of talk. But he said that he will definitely deliver this talk. Thank you once again, sir, for delivering your talk. Though right now you are not, you are camping far away from the town and not in your conventional office or home. Thank you, sir.
Yes, I am. That's my camping. That's my headlight.
Okay, sir. Good night, sir. Bye-bye.
It's lovely talking to you. Thank you very much for having me. I hope you have a wonderful convention.
Right,
Yes.
sir. Thank you very much, sir. Once again, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye, sir.
Bye, everybody.
Mishra ji? Hello?